Well,
Okay. Whenever you
oh,
want to. This is roll inform or just doing a test.
right.
So there's no schedule here. We
Yeah,
just
well,
want you to talk like you normally talk.
you asked me to tell me of memories that I have, and that's a pretty big order. Um, I'll be able to tell you some things, and some things will be unconsciously you'll probably miss. But
Well,
I might first tell you about growing up. I think you put down as growing up in boyhood. Uh, First, I might say that we as boys had no idea that we would be a soldier. Like in some countries, a lot of kids, when you're 10, 12, 14 years old, you know that you're going to the military to serve. And we as boys never had that. And secondly, what made it probably even worse was we lived in a agricultural area
yes, true.
where we weren't totally informed like you might be today with television and news and newspapers. We weren't totally aware of the world around us. The news that we got at that time was probably, oh, a president got elected or whatever, but we didn't know anything about the military. Nonetheless,
And how old were you?
well, I'm talking now
Growing up.
about
Oh,
like 10, 12, 14 years old. But eventually we all went to high school, and high school was hard to come by because we lived in the country and the high school was in the city. But that year, 1937, somehow somebody had the foresight to bus kids into the city. Well, the day came, I put on a clean shirt and waited for a bus, and the bus picked us up and
yeah.
hauled us to the city. It was the first year that that particular area had school buses. And the school buses in those days, colors were red, white, and blue.
Hmm.
Yellow is something that's been added since that time, yeah, red, white, and blue. So we went to high school, and in some ways we liked high school, some ways we exactly didn't. But nonetheless, we graduated, and we graduated at like age 17. And,
Did you know you were going in the military?
oh no,
since
not
you were
yet. Well, by that time, by 17, there were rumblings about war and young men may be drafted and all of that kind
And
of
so
thing.
how old were you?
That was 17.
17. In what year?
That would be 1940, 1940, I think. Then Pearl Harbor happened, 1941, and Germany began to march into the little countries of Europe. And because I was 17 years old, 17 years and let's say 11 months, I always joke about this, but it's pretty accurate, that the day I turned 18, went to the mailbox, and I got a letter from Uncle Sam. Like the day after my birthday. Well, somewhere in the courthouse, they had records of all the boys that were 17 and turning 18. And as soon as you turned 18, off you go. So sure enough, we were drafted.
Do you remember how you felt that day when you got that notice in the mail?
No, nothing special. We knew that it wasn't exactly good, but we were kind of proud. Oh, I'm going to become a soldier, you know. And Christ, I'm going to click my heels and salute, and oh boy, I'm going to be a soldier. Soldier was something you kind of looked up to.
Did you have friends who had been drafted, so you kind of knew what you had to do? Were any of your brothers drafted? Or
No, no. That was a totally new concept. a draft or whatever, my older brother John was literally too old to go in the army. He was like 9 years older than I, so if I was 18, he was already 27. But my parents were quite concerned about my younger brothers, Jerry and Frank, that if Laddie goes in, what is to say the younger boys will have to go in too? Well, anyway,
What was the feeling about the war in 1940? Was it obvious that the U.S. was going to win, or was it kind of a toss-up?
I don't know. I suppose you could say a toss-up, but we were all dedicated. We nearly wanted to go to fight that war because we were getting uh, some kind of propaganda that Hitler was a bad man. He wasn't good. He didn't do well for his people, and we got to get rid of him. And we're going to go over there and really knock the hell out of him. You know, that's the feeling between all the young guys. Um, so anyway, uh, I was drafted. I first, well, with the invitation from Uncle Sam, in that same envelope, there were, I don't know if they were Greyhound bus tickets or railroad tickets, you know, on the train. But nonetheless, there were tickets that would take you to Fort Sheridan. Well, when you got to Fort Sheridan, you know, free ride. Holy cow, this is nice. I don't even have to pay for it, you know. Little did we know that when we got to Fort Sheridan, it wasn't 12 hours, and we had to throw away our civilian clothes and put on army clothes.
How did that feel when you had to throw away your regular clothes?
I don't know, we were anxious to get the army clothes because now I'm going to be a soldier. But the only problem was with getting army clothes, when you wore your own clothes, you could wear them with any old way you wanted. But not in the army. Stand up straight, soldier. And where in the hell do you learn to tie that tie? The sergeant say, tie that tie like you're supposed to, nice and straight. It couldn't be off to a side. Tuck that shirt in. You couldn't wear your shirt on the outside. Everything had to be according to the military. And you wouldn't dare have your shoes unpolished. They had to be, even if you walked down the dusty road, and the way you polish your shoes is you rub on the back of your pants leg one shoe, and then you push it over and you rub the other one. Because when the sergeant looked at you, he looked at you from head to toe, and he'd bawl you out like, those shoes need a little polishing. Do you hear me? Oh, God. He'd really bark at you, you know. And nobody's ever barked at me like that before. My dad used to, you know, yell at me sometimes, but never like this. And when the sergeant barked at you, you couldn't go home to Mama and say, hey, Mom, they're picking on me, you know.
You're in the army now.
You're in the army now, soldier, stand up straight. And you were at their mercy, so to speak. Well, so we got those clothes.
At Fort Sheridan.
Fort Sheridan. And we were there, we didn't do much of any kind of training there. We were only there about maybe a week, 2 weeks at most. But we got a little feel of what it is to be a soldier. Then somebody somewhere knew that we needed certain kinds of training. So our first trip was to basic training in camp. No, it was Fort Robinson, Arkansas. And there we were all kinds of, well, not amphibian training, but just plain ordinary training. I remember going out at night in swamps with water about this deep, and the swamp was infested with snakes and whatnot.
Mosquitoes.
And we had to go out there at night. And why we had to go through this swamp is because we used to laugh, complain about this. We used to have to go by compass. You had a little piece of paper, and you look at your compass, north, south, east, west, and your little piece of paper would say 10,000 yards due north. So you'd walk that far to a point, and then you looked at the next place on your paper and it said now go 300 yards east. And you followed this thing, and you had to end up at a certain spot. Maybe you might end up back where you started, but you didn't know when you started where you're going to end up. But you had to learn how to follow that compass. And we did that, but it took us all night now in the dark and in watery conditions. I don't know if we never really came upon any snakes. Maybe that was just talk. I don't know.
Did you start to have second doubts about what this army thing was all about?
The what?
What it meant to be in the army? Did you have second doubts on how glamorous it was? And
Oh,
did you still enjoy it?
Well, you begin to kind of question, the glamour of after going through some of these swamps. Well, anyway, that was either we were in the swamps at night, or else we were on a hot, sandy, desert-like place in the daytime. It was kind of punishing. It was, either water or sand. It wasn't easy with walking on nice grass or whatever.
So they were hardening you up.
Hardening you up, and not only hardening you up, but you didn't you learned not to complain, about the trip was too long or the walking was too hard. You just did it. Well, from Camp Robinson, we went to Camp Pickett, Virginia. Now we were joining the Pennsylvania National Guard, and the National Guard of Pennsylvania was under strength. So myself, was put into the National Guard of Pennsylvania to kind of bolster up. To be a fighting force, you had to have 360 men per company, and the National Guard only had 240. So we were put into the National Guard, and because we had the number now, fighting force, we were then became known as the 28th Infantry Division, and the 28th Infantry Division had its insignia. I think you've seen that, the bloody bucket. That was the insignia.
Oh, from Pennsylvania.
And so from that time on, we were the 28th Division. And then we trained in Camp Pickett, I think most of one summer before we...
Summer of which year would it be?
That'd be 41. Yeah, I think it'd be 41. Then somewhere in that time we were shipped to Newport News, Virginia. Newport News doesn't sound like a city, but it is a city. It's really a port of some kind. And from that, we were doing amphibian training then already in the Virginia area, landing on beaches, but things were pretty good there. It was sandy and it was hot, like 90 every day, but we didn't mind it too much. We started our amphibian training there, and eventually we knew that when we were shipped out of there, we landed by ship. Yes, in Newport News, we were picked up we loaded on a ship, and we went somewhere. We didn't know where. Nobody, only the big general maybe knew where we were going, but we as the...
Okay, so now you've left the camp for good, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back to the amphibious training. What was that like? What things did you do? And...
Very simple things. You loaded on one of these boats, these landing craft with a big gate in front, and you'd ride around on that thing. You'd bounce around for maybe 2 hours until you were literally nauseated from bouncing around that goddamn boat. You get seasick, you know. And especially for those of us that were land people, we weren't accustomed. I suppose if you did a lot of boating, maybe somehow you wouldn't get seasick, but a lot of us get even seasick. And then we had to put in our time. I mean, you had a day like today, so I suppose the sergeant told the guy running the boat, "Yeah, just give us a couple more rides around the bay here or something, because we can't come into camp until 4 o'clock." So there we were, riding around, bouncing on that shore, and then you'd be out maybe 1,000 yards, and we always knew when we were kind of it's over, because normally we were just bouncing and bouncing. Now they'd rev up those motors. There was like, I think, 2 engines in the back, inboards, and we'd race for the shore. And we knew that this is where we get off of this goddamn thing, see? So we'd race for the shore and get stuck in the sand, drop the door, and run out on the beach. If we were lucky, we got up on the beach far enough on the sand that we wouldn't get wet. We'd get our shoes full of sand. But if we could plow onto that beach far enough, and I don't even know how we got back off the beach. I think we were picked up in trucks or something, you know, to get back to our camp where we started. I don't remember that. But that was amphibian training. When you land on the beaches, you carry your rifle, and you run crouched onto the beach, and when you hit the beach, what they say, you hit the beach, that means you lay down, and now you become a small target. What you don't want to do in the so-called army or wars is create a big target for the enemy to shoot at. Don't run totally standing up. You crouch down, and you're only a half of the target. And then you slither like a goddamn salamander on the sand, so you don't create a target, you know. Or if you do get up and run a short distance. Yeah, slithering on the sand to create a small as possible target. And it gets to be, like I say, old hat. Well, a lot of things in the military becomes old hat. While Pembrow Dock was kind of an interesting place, and we were kind of not into fighting a war, we were having a ball there in Pembrow Dock. In Pembrow Dock, they also had Sutherland, I remember that, Sutherland planes, British planes, that had a big snout on the front, and they'd go out over the channel hunting submarines. And we befriended these flyers, and they kind of said, "Hey, you want to go on a mission with us," or whatever they called it. And so we kind of said, "Yeah, we'll go." So the worst thing I ever said is "Yes, we'll go." That's hell scared out of me. We got on these planes, and we'd go only certain times that they'd take us, and fly over the channel. And that plane, you'd recognize if you saw a picture. It looked like a fish with a snout, and the snout hangs down. And when they're running radar on these submarines, they fly like only, I suppose, 100 feet above the water. But when you, a novice, a soldier, an army man running, you pick up your feet in the aisle because you think you're going to get your feet wet. They were 100 feet. They knew what they were doing. But when you looked, you just saw that water going underneath. You said, "Holy Christ, we're going to hit the water pretty quick," you know. But we went out several times with them. Never had any action. See, if they were to find a submarine, they pinpoint it somehow, and then they have depth charges that they drop from under the plane.
The same plane? The same plane that has a
same
radar has
plane,
bombs?
yeah. And drop these depth charges, and that blows the hell out of the submarine. Anyway, that's what we did in Pembrow Dock. We were there, and the reason I
This
maybe
is in England now?
in southern England, in the part that was called, well, it still is called Wales. And people that come from Wales here in America are referred to as Welsh. Welsh. They speak a different kind of English, which is sometimes really hard to understand. I remember one time we took from the same place, we took a little weekend off and we went to an island. The name of the island was Lanely. We pronounced it Lanelli. And this Welshman, we were buying the tickets, he kept telling us, no, 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 he said, you don't want Lanelli, you want Clockley. That's how they talk. They pronounce it Clockley, about like that. They have a different kind of a brogue. So after yes?
Didn't it seem so completely different for you for coming from a small town in Wisconsin? And here you are on the other side of the world, and people are completely very different.
Oh yeah, that was a great experience, a change, you know, where you're coming from little Phillips, Wisconsin, and here you are in a place where the people are even hard to understand. They claim they're talking English, but it sure was no English to me. The regular Englishmen, you'd meet those, they sound like Englishmen that you hear today, and you may miss a word here or there, but generally speaking you can understand them. But these Welshmen, or some of the Irish too, they were hard to understand.
Well, now, German planes had bombed London at one point. Did you ever go to London or see any bombed out areas?
No.
So far you haven't seen any kind of real actions or results?
No. We went on what we called on pass. That'd be if you were a good boy you could apply at the CO, commanding officer's office, for a pass for the weekend. If you were a good boy, if you screwed up, like you got maybe three times the sergeant had to tell you to polish your shoes, and you got to reveille late and whatnot, you may not get a pass, but you had to be kind of like a good boy, I call it, and you get a pass. So we did get to, not to London, but just before London. I can't remember the name of the town. Pretty big town, but not London. So that was 19 months in Pembroke Dock that we had spent there training.
Training again for amphibious?
All amphibious, everything amphibious. And it was kind of a joke. We were amphibious, but on invasion day, remember, when you're going with that boat, you're amphibious, and when your boat stops, that's the end of your amphibious, right where the boat stops. Now you go on shore, and now you are infantry 100%. In other words, what I'm saying, you're only good for like one invasion in real combat. You don't do it over and over and over. But some of the things were good that they did over and over. I remember this. We always balked at run a mile, walk a mile, run a mile, walk a mile. And holy cow, hot day. Can you imagine 90-degree weather and you're in a full field pack with these straps on your shoulders and, I don't know, about 30, 40 pounds of stuff in your blanket, your tent, in your pack, hand grenades, your rifle, a lot of stuff to carry. and we'd run 1 mile. Run. And if you were lucky, your commander, whoever was up front, if he had short legs, then you were in pretty good shape. But then we had Colonel Dowling, who was 6'7", 6'6". And guess what? He was mostly legs. Of that 6 foot, I think 4 feet were legs. All right, man, let's go. And he stepped, holy crap. We in the back were running to keep up, you know. So that was what we trained as: walk a mile, run a mile. But then I'll tell you what, that's one of the things that in training, a lot of the things you do in training don't help you at all in real combat. But that's one thing that they did. One thing that was right: run a mile, walk a mile. Now we're in the battlefront, and we're having skirmishes with a German army, and we were always more powerful. We had 80 men, the Germans had 20. We had 110, they had 35. We were always overpowering them. So that meant that when we'd overpower them, they'd have to back up, and back up, and back up, retreat, and retreat. Sometimes they would have to retreat. Normally you can retreat, men can retreat at about 3 miles per hour. You know, walking, you back up, and you back up, and you back up. But here comes these goddamn Americans. They walk a mile and they run a mile. Average out 6 miles per hour. They're coming at us at 6 miles an hour, and we're only backing up 3 miles an hour. You follow what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And we can't back up fast enough. So what do you do so you could move faster? You throw away your ammunition. You throw away your hand grenades so you could run back faster. They even threw away their rifles, you know, and they ran like a bunch of chickens. And here we come, run a mile, walk a mile, run a mile, walk a mile. We were coming at them at, maybe, I never clocked it, but like, let's say 6 miles an hour. Can you imagine how that would be plain hell for you when you're backing up and you can't back up fast enough?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, that was one of the tactics that the Americans used. Not only walk a mile, run a mile, but at certain times, we didn't do it very often, but if we wanted to push the enemy back real fast, we would load on trucks, and we'd ride 5 miles in a truck, get off, the truck, go back, pick up another group, ride 5 miles, but we made that 5 miles in how long does it take for a truck to go 5 miles? Mm-hmm. Like 5 minutes. And we knew that they can't back up as fast as we are. We used to call it shuttling, I think. Not a shuttle bus, but a shuttle, truck shuttle or whatever.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
But so those things were an advantage, to be able to move them back faster, because they just fell apart. Firstly, I'm reading it in some of the books, that the German soldiers weren't, if we thought we were a bunch of lemons, they were worse than we were. They didn't even know how to shoot their gun. At least we had enough training that we knew how to shoot our gun, how to load it, and we had training in amphibian, we had training in walk a mile, run a mile. Some of them that we had captured, we'd ask them, you know, how long you been in the army? 2 weeks. Well, how much can a soldier learn in 2 weeks? And most of us, we were in the army well over 2 years, and we were probably trained for nearly 2 years. So we were even better trained than they were.
So you had the stamina to be able to outlast them. Then.
Yeah. And well, you bring up another good point. With stamina comes availability of food. I can't ever recall of being, oh, you're hungry, everybody gets hungry, but I mean deathly hungry. we always had, General Eisenhower made a speech one time in front of 500,000 soldiers, and he said, as long as you fight for me, you will never run out of ammunition or food. And by God, he was right. We didn't always have the best food, you know, the salad and all of this kind of thing, but we always had, if it was a hot meal, it would be like round steak with mashed potatoes and gravy and beans, but it was hot, you know. And then if you couldn't always get that kind of food, you always had some kind of D rations, which was solid chocolate, C rations, which were bacon and eggs in a little can, all of that kind of stuff. In fact, I always liked, I think it was a C ration. It came in a little box, it was wax, waterproof, that you could leave it lay out in the rain, and the next morning you could eat a dry breakfast, you know, it would be dry. And in that little carton were 4 cigarettes. Hey. And if you were a heavier smoker, you'd kind of buddy up with some guy that was a non-smoker. And he says, hey, you want my cigarettes? Yeah. Now you'd have 8 cigarettes to smoke in that day. You know, how lucky can you get if you're a smoker?
What else would they give you with these rations?
Well,
Did you
there
get
was
Wrigley's gum?
the what?
Wrigley's chewing gum?
Oh yeah, there was always a stick of gum. We're talking C-Rat. There were like 4 crackers, and a can of something. Cigarettes, I remember vividly. I don't recall what else there might have been, but there was.
Was it kind of like a snack? Was a C ration kind
Well,
of a snack?
today, yes, you'd call it a snack. Like probably the amount of corned beef you had there, each of you had, that's about how much there was in a total meal, you know. A little can, like a little can of tuna, about that size. It wasn't much, but it was a hell of a lot better. We'd captured German soldiers, and they had a loaf of bread, hard bread, like Italian bread, tied on their belt, and then down back, on the back somehow this wasn't just what they picked up, but this is Army issue. They'd have a sausage, like a summer sausage, about that big around, and when you were hungry, you'd cut off a slice of bread and a slice of that sausage, you know, maybe that thick, and you'd eat that. Well, you know, how nutritious could that be? You know.
And what happens if you had to go wading through the swamp?
That's right, or dust and dirt. But in those days, they didn't much believe or understand cleanliness of dust or whatever. We, I think, were ahead of them on that game too, because if you don't eat clean food, you could get sick. And what are you going to do with a dozen sick soldiers? You know, they'll just hold you up. So.
Did you smoke before you got in the Army?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I think I don't know when I started smoking, but I remember. I think I was still in high school when we started smoking, because I can recall Marvel cigarettes. They were poor quality tobacco, but they sold for 15 cents a pack. And 3 of us, we'd each kick in a nickel, and we'd buy a pack of cigarettes. Holy cow, we could puff away like you can't believe. No, money was hard to come by. I mean, maybe some days 2 of the people each have a nickel, but we were minus a nickel, we couldn't buy any cigarettes. We'd probably have to wait till the next day till we had to getting 3 nickels together was hard to come by.
And smoking was not something that was discouraged at that time like it is now.
Oh no, oh definitely not. It was nearly a sign of macho-ness, you know. I smoke a cigarette. It wasn't frowned upon like today. Oh no, oh no. In fact, I think that's the reason why I'm smoking today. My father was a smoker, and my father looked up at him, and God, he was big as a giant, and I always said to myself, I want to be like he is. And he'd smoke. He mainly smoked a pipe, but us kids somehow didn't take to pipes, but we did take to cigarettes. And you smoke because of Dad sort of set the image. I think we weren't totally aware of that, what we were doing, but I think, you know, I think all my brothers smoked. I think they all quit. I'm the only one that still smoked. Well, anyway,
We were back at the training camp in England, where we left off here. So you were there for 19 months.
total, as I recall, total of 19 months, but I'm not sure if we were just in one place. I think we were. In fact, in those, I might just tell you another little incident in those 19 months. When I was shipped overseas, nobody in my family was to know where I was. But Aunt Marie and I had made out this secret code. When I signed my name, see, I was at Pembrow Dock, okay? When I signed my name on the first letter to Aunt Marie, I put down Laddie P. Pospisil. The next letter had Laddie E. Pospisil. The next one would be M. Pembrow. And one letter, middle initial, and that way Marie got to know where little Laddie boy was.
That was pretty smart.
Marie will tell you that yet today. But hey, I think that was quite illegal, because in those days they were pretty careful. I know the letters that I would send home, I wouldn't dare say while I'm doing amphibian training in England. Oh no, that was all censored. That would be all crossed out when I would be writing home. In fact, what I was doing with Marie would be somewhat illegal, I'm sure too. That would be it could lead to disclosure of where American troops are located. And some enemy agent over here in this country could probably benefit from that.
Yeah, that was the idea. So did you notice any stockpiling of weapons when you were in England? Did you see them starting to build up for something?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Well, you see that on, if you watch any, you probably don't, but if you saw any films, like I said before, if there were 2,000 English people living there, there were probably 10,000 Americans. Well, the Americans just took over the whole place. And then you'd go to like a football field, and there were 100 airplanes with their wings folded up, parked on a football field. Then you'd walk someplace else, and you came to an orchard, and you looked under the branches, and you'd see 200 American tanks parked in an orchard. All this buildup for the so-called invasion. Oh yes, that England was, I don't know what the word would be, but it would be a stockpile of unbelievable stuff. Like you wouldn't begin to even conceive. I can't verify these numbers, but it would be something like bombs on pallets covering 10 acres. If you can visualize 10 acres. And when I'm saying bombs, suckers are that big around and 4 feet long. Just piles and piles. Then there was gasoline. Piles and piles of gasoline and all the other equipment. It wouldn't take a German agent very long to figure out what the hell's going on here. And they probably did. They probably had pretty good information.
What did you think? being a soldier, you seen all this stuff. What did you?
Well, it made me feel good. It
Mhm.
always made me feel good to see, you know, a lot of stuff. It was kind of like the more the merrier, the more power we have, you know, the more the better. One of our, as being in the infantry, one of our greatest helpers would be the artillery that would shoot shells. You know, our enemy is over here and the artillery was way behind us, but they'd shoot shells over us and hit the enemy over here, and they were softening up their enemy. There was only one thing better than the artillery, and that was the Air Force. Our Air Force. The single little plane with machine guns on, he'd go just like the artillery was over there, and then he just rattled the hell out of the Germans that were over
Infantry.
here with their machine guns,
Mhm.
and then he'd be gone. And then a little while we'd hear him coming back, just whistling. He wasn't going as fast as a jet, but there's something on that plane that would just whistle, and he'd come down and rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat, then he'd fly back up again, over and over and over. And we, as you know, we were ready to applaud because he was helping us. The more planes we saw, the better, the safer it is for us. I think I deserve a break.
Oh, sure.
So I've got a lot of things I could